Hi, my name is Blake Chastain, and this is The Good Books. It's a show primarily featuring author interviews, but I'm between interviews and I thought I'd share some book recommendations instead. And guess what? It's Pride Month, and you should be reading something affirming by LGBTQ plus authors. So I'm going to share 10 books that I think you should check out, and finally with a few books that are on my own TBR pile. So let's start with a book assigned in grad school. That book is called Why Marriage? The History Shaping Today's Debate Over Gay Equality by George Chauncey. As I mentioned, I read this one in grad school. This book was published in 2004, prior to the Obergefell decision that legalized marriage equality in the United States. It humanized all the reasons why marriage equality was so paramount to the LGBTQ community in a way that hadn't reached me yet, having been at that point in primarily evangelical spaces. The next book is called Outside the Lines: How Embracing Queerness Will Transform Your Faith by Mihi Kempcourt. It was years later when I read this book, and it absolutely floored me. It was the perfect book for me to read as my notion of what spirituality could look like began to expand and include more of life in an affirming way instead of some damning or judgmental way. And if you are a person that is trying to integrate your Christianity and your understanding of your own sexuality or those that you care for in your life or in society, highly recommend this book. It was incredible. The next book on the list, and we're shifting into some of the books that I featured those authors on my shows. The first book is Bad Theology Kills by Kevin Garcia. It's a great memoir and very much a distillation of one person, Kevin's experience in reckoning with the bad theology that they inherited from evangelicalism and really challenging that and finding a better way to live. The next book is also in this sort of memoir category, which is Gina Cadlick's Heretic. That book is from her perspective growing up in Iowa, getting married subsequently after college, realizing that they were queer, and then it's hard to summarize someone's life in something like that, and that's what a memoir is for. So that is another very good book that I recommend. The next one is Empty the Pews, an anthology written by various authors and edited by Chrissy Stroop and Lauren O'Neill. Lauren actually later became the editor for my book. That book is a great collection of people who share very visceral, very personal stories about their lives within various religious communities and why they left. That's the notion behind Chrissy's hashtag Empty the Pews that then became this project. The next book is written by Rachel Feltman, and it's called Been There, Done That. And that is a more general interest sort of book about the history of sexuality and sex and gender throughout human history, and very, very successfully challenges the notions of what we consider normal in our day-to-day life and what is quote-unquote normal. Those things have always been in flux and have always been more dynamic than the people in the world who may wish that these things were very heteronormative. On that note, there will be another one later that I talk about that talks about heterosexuality directly. The next book that I just read recently is called Females by Andrea Long Chu. It's a very sort of provocative, shorter book, and the hook that you can even find even in some of the marketing language in it, which is part of the book as well, is that everyone is female and everyone hates it. It's written by a trans woman and really does dive into many of the ways in which our culture is just inherently misogynistic. There were aspects of that book that were challenging for me because I didn't know some of the background that they were talking about, because they were talking about a very particular play that was generated by someone who assaulted Andy Warhol. And so there were some things that I didn't connect to or didn't have knowledge of, but that it was very, very provocative and very much worth your time, especially in the way that it will challenge some of what may be unexamined misogyny that we carry. Shifting now to the books that are on my TBR list. Those include My Gay Church Days by George Azar. I don't know if I'm pronouncing their last name correctly. It is part of the genre of those that people who have left confining religion, judgmental religion, like we see in evangelicalism, that is queerphobic, homophobic, and so on. That has been on my list for a while. I do have a copy. I haven't had the opportunity to read it yet. A new one that just came out, I believe, more recently, is called A Short History of Trans Misogyny. If that, I will have to double check myself after I record this. It may or may not have come out recently or not, but the digital version did come out from Verso recently. That is by Jules Gill Peterson, and I'm very much looking forward to getting into that. As I referenced earlier when talking about Rachel Feltman's book about the notion of heteronormativity and heterosexuality, one of the books that I have picked up that I hope to read is The Invention of Heterosexuality by Jonathan Ned Katz. That one is a bit older now, but that one is one that I am very intrigued by, just in the very sort of notion that what we sort of consider normal is probably a pretty recent historical invention. And somewhat along the same lines, books like The Way We Never Were or Marriage a History, both of them by Stephanie Kuntz, those books also challenge those sort of accepted, supposed eternal type things, especially for someone like myself who comes from evangelicalism that does project that these things have been unchanging through history. That's just not the nature of history. And that's what's so wonderful and fascinating about learning history, is that we can challenge those things. And that's a delightful thing. And what I love about books, and that's why I'm shifting to talking about them so much. The final one on my TBR is one that I have started, which is Fierce Desires, A New History of Sex and Sexuality in America by Rebecca L. Davis. And I have enjoyed the first couple chapters that I have read. With books like this, I sometimes dip in and out, especially big history books, big in both the sort of scope of the history that they're trying to tell, as well as if it happens to be a bit longer. So I've read the first chapter or two. The first chapter details someone who was very likely intersex, who was in the Puritan colonies and settlements in very early days, and the court cases that were recorded about them, which was fascinating and does tie back to this notion that what we may think of how queer people were accepted or not accepted, history can be surprising. Let's just say that. And regardless, with all of these recommendations, my hope is that you can find something that encourages you, that you can find something that, if you are exploring these things for yourself or trying to understand someone that you love who has come out to you, or if you just are curious or you are queer yourself, whatever the circumstance may be, that you can find this body of work and so many more beyond this short list that can encourage you in this time, because there's a lot of discouragement out there. But there are people who have put their stories down and have shared them so that we can learn from their wisdom, from their pains, from their triumphs. And that is the joy of reading and writing. And so, happy Pride, everyone. Go pick up a good book.